It is time to look at how Nucleus, my 150-gram clone of the Hacksmiths Orbitron, performed at ARC's July meet. Let's start this video by saying that I wasn't really sure if I was going to run Nucleus as part of the tournament at ARC's July meet. Running it in a tournament means getting a lot of fights with it, at least 3, and because of the very tight electronics pack in here, it's very, very difficult to get the battery in and out. So I was worried about being able to actually charge the thing between fights, which would have meant that the already low voltage that I'm running would be even lower, resulting in a slower drive and slower weapons, which is never what you want in a combat robot event. However, at the actual event itself, I timed myself pulling the battery out. I found a new way to just kind of like wiggle the wires in an exact position to get the battery out, which meant that it was a little bit faster and allowed me to run it in the full tournament. That means that it is going up into ARC's regular tournament structure, which is a round robin first and then a tournament bracket later, based on how many points you get in the round robin. You get 2 points for a win, 1 point for a draw, and no points for a loss. So with all of that in mind, it is time to look at how its very first fight actually went. And for that, we went up against a robot called Time Warp, which is an angled overhead bar spinner.
Can you release? Alright, we have it. If you can unstick, controls off, please everyone. And controls back on, please everyone.
Yeah, I expect to get the last this many hits.
It's a bit.
9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2. That's it. Order everyone.
I can't go forwards all of a sudden, which is weird. Yes! That went well! That went, like, way better than it had any right to. Honestly, in the testing that we did for this thing a while back when I built it, the fact that the weapons stop every time I hit something, I thought was going to be a major issue in this fight. I also thought that these motors and especially the epoxy holding the weapons in place were going to explode in the first hit, especially the first hit with a big, nasty horizontal. And in that case, Time Warp was my worst case scenario first fight, because I honestly thought that thing was going to annihilate Nucleus. And yet, here we are at the end of this fight with a win. We took multiple weapon-to-weapon hits and came away totally fine from those. There was a very, very small amount of damage on the actual weapon teeth of Nucleus, but other than that, it actually worked. It held up really, really well, and much better than I expected it to hold up, which is great. Like, that is incredible. Also, the fact that the weapons were going down wasn't a huge issue. I was able to often back up, get away from my opponent, spin the weapons back up, and everything was okay. However, having said that, it was still very annoying to have to actually do that. I think this is mostly because I have fit very, very small ESCs into this thing for size and weight reasons, and those ESCs do not handle the back rush of current that happens when the weapon suddenly stops and stops the motor, and the ESC expects it to keep spinning. Everything just kind of browns out and stops working. So you need to throttle everything down and run it again, or run the throttle back up again to get the weapons back working, which, if my opponent is going to drive very aggressively, is going to be an issue, because one hit in means that I lose my weapons until I can get away from my opponent to spin my weapons back up, which, yeah, not something I really want to have happen in a fight, but thankfully in this fight I was able to back off anytime I needed to and get the weapons back up and spinning. Then of course there was him going upside down, and then there was an unstick in the other side of the arena. Post unstick, he was stuck upside down in the corner over by the pit, and that was a really, really good position for me to be in and a bad position for him to be in. I then tried to use that opportunity to push him into the pit, only to find that I lacked pushing power fairly substantially in this robot. And realistically, that is because I'm running the whole robot on 1S, and it is a single reduction from a brushed motor to the wheel, which means I don't have a lot of torque. Also, in attempting to do that, I caused something in the gear train to misalign, and that then became an issue. After the fight, I could not drive in a straight line. Well, I kind of could. It tried to go in a straight line and froze a couple of times before finally allowing me to actually take off in a straight line, which is not great for a combat robot where you want to be able to control where the thing is pointing all the time. Having said that, on the whole, that is a pretty good fight. The fact that Nucleus survived all of that and survived many front-on, weapon-to-weapon hits, that's great. It winning its first fight and winning it in that manner, perfect. 10 out of 10, could not have asked for a better fight first fight than that one for Nucleus. So with that success under our belt, let's look at our next fight. This is a robot called President Birdie. It is a very, very interesting design. It is a shuffler, it is a hugger, it has an overhead saw on it. There is a lot going on with this design.
I mean, that worked out as well as it possibly could have. Uh-oh. Why have the weapons gone down now?
With him being an overhead saw, I was very, very stressed going into this fight. Our top armor on Nucleus is thin. It is like 0.5 millimeter to 1 millimeter of TPU. There is nothing there. If he had got one single shot on any of this TPU along the top here, he would have hit something critical. Either he would have hit a motor itself, shutting down one side of drive, or he would have hit an ESC or a battery or other ESCs. Anywhere he hit this black H piece, he would have done serious, serious damage. But we got the luckiest I think I've ever got in a combat robot fight, because instead what happened is he grabbed us and then swung his arm back and spun up. And in that spin up time, I was able to spin my own weapons back up, because in the initial grab, the weapons had gone down because I'd made a hit, so the weapons had stopped. Thankfully, like I said, he gave me that second pause to allow myself to throttle down and throttle back up, which spun the weapon back up, And what that meant is that when his hammer came down, I'm pretty sure my weapon went directly between his weapon motor and his support on the other side, breaking everything and ripping the whole motor assembly out, which meant that his saw was busted from there on out. If he had been like a centimeter one way or the other, it would have been a weapon-on-weapon collision, or it would have been a shot directly into the pieces of the top armor I really, really did not want to get hit in. So I got very lucky there. Having said that, that meant, of course, that then we had to continue on with this fight, and he, being a shuffler, has a weight bonus. He is heavier than I am, and of course, as we saw in the previous fight, the weapons on Nucleus are small and do not do a lot of damage. So going up against what is effectively a brick of TPU with very small, very ineffective weapons was a very difficult task. I tried to hit him a couple of times. I got a couple of decent shots out of these tiny weapons on him, but at the end of the day, I was doing very little to him in these exchanges, other than just kind of being annoying, I guess. Then I decided to try and change tack and try and push him around, because of course a shuffler doesn't usually have as much traction as a wheeled setup does, so I thought I might have a chance to do that. Unfortunately, that was my downfall, because in doing so, I brought back the hitch in the weapon or in the drive system that causes the robot not to be able to drive straight, and as soon as that happened, he was able to push me wherever he liked, and that was down the pit. Because of course it was. That's exactly where you should put somebody who is not driving correctly. So we lost this fight. It wasn't too bad on the whole as a loss. It could have been a whole lot worse. One shot directly into the middle would have sniped this battery, and that would have been it for Nucleus for the day, because the battery I have in here is one of a kind. It is a hand-soldered battery, so I do not have spares for that at all, and it would take a month to get spares for that in, and I would still need to actually like put it all together myself. So I'm very, very glad that that did not go that way, because it means even though we lost, we can continue to fight in our round robin group. Speaking of, we have our third and final fight for our round robin group, a robot called Overkill, which is interesting. It is an overhead bar spinner with a massive bar on it. Between these three fights, an angled bar spinner, an overhead attack robot, and a very big horizontal bar, we have had the three worst types of robots for Nucleus to fight. If I had gone into this event with a list of robots or a list of robot types I did not want to fight with Nucleus, it's these three, and yet here we are. Yep, that's yeah. When I get moving, I get quite fast. It takes a second. So that was an interesting fight. Right out of the gate, I had some drive issues. It seemed like even though I had moved motors and stuff back around in here to get the gears to engage, which is what I found out was the drive issue, is that the motors can move ever so slightly back and forth, which causes the pinion gear to disconnect from the drive gear and or move it into a position where it's like binding up the gear, or binding up into the wheel, I should say. And that was the issues that we saw with those bindings. So I moved everything back around. I tightened down all the screws as tight as I could possibly get them to try and hopefully fix that drive issue. And then right out of the gate, I got a turn out of the robot as one side of drive kicked in better than the other. And there was just a tiny little hitch on one side and it pushed me over towards the pit. Then I was on the pit and actually stuck for a second, because our pits, don't quite sit flat and level, so you can get stuck on the little lip in there. And I was worried that I was about to lose the fight by basically being stuck in a millimeter's worth of pit, but I did manage to wiggle myself back out and free from there to basically go straight weapon to weapon with overkill, which again, thankfully, we survived. I am really impressed with how the weapon-to-weapon hits have gone for Nucleus in this event, because again, these are tiny, tiny little weapon motors and tiny, tiny little weapons that are epoxied onto the outside of these weapons. I had never done this before. I was fully expecting that at one point or another, a weapon-on-weapon hit would just shatter something, either the motor itself or the connection between the two, or these 3D printed tool steel weapons, because again, these are 3D printed by PCBWay, and I didn't know if that was going to survive full combat. And as it turns out, yes, all of that absolutely survives full combat, which is incredible. And gives me hope for a potential future version of this, because while the performance here that you've just seen in these 3 fights hasn't been brilliant, I think that I could do better with a few tweaks to this chassis and to the drive system and also the weapon system. So just basically a full new revision of the robot. It's not really tweaks at that point, it's kind of more of a version 2. But we should continue on talking about this fight. After a hit or so, his weapon died, which was kind of a relief in some ways, because it meant that even though we were surviving those shots, we weren't continuing to test the weapon system. And then of course we got an actually good hit out of these weapons somehow. I wasn't expecting them to have enough power to flip him over upside down, but we did manage to do that out of a hit, which is great. These things, like, they are the weakest weapons I've ever designed, and apparently they still have enough power to flip over a 150 gram robot, which, cool, that's great. That is great to see, especially as that won us the fight without us taking too much damage in this one. Because of course, the problem with an overhead spinner is that sometimes they just get stuck and they cannot drive upside down, which is exactly what happened in this fight. Now we are at the end of the round robin group. We have done our 3 fights. We are sitting at a record of 2-1. And I unfortunately had a decision to make at this point in time, because not only had Nucleus made it through into the finals, but also This Is a Party, my other ant weight that I was fighting at the July event, had also made it into the finals. And we don't really let people take 2 robots into the finals, so I ended up dropping Nucleus so that I could run This Is a Party through into the finals. And most of the reason that I dropped Nucleus is because of, well, the drive and the weapons. So most of the robot. I mean, it was surviving really, really well, but even with all of the modifications I'd made and tightening down all the bolts and everything, the drive was still hitching in that last fight, and sometimes if I wanted to go forwards, I did not get to go forwards, which meant I had to correct as I drove, which is not a good thing when you are fighting in the finals and fighting against robots that have won all of their other fights and are most likely going to take the fight to you. And looking at the 2 robots I had there, I thought This Is a Party was going to have a better chance to make it through the finals than Nucleus. And I think I made the right call there, because This Is a Party ended up coming second for the event, and I don't know that Nucleus could have done the same thing. But even though Nucleus didn't make it through to the finals based on my own decision, we do still have one more fight to talk about, and that is the all-in destructive rumble.
I mean, you wouldn't have that issue at Havoc because there is no alpha area, there is no area across that way. Oh, let me get on the glass. Oh, he's fell. Yeah, I can't. Nice mate. That was literally down before the thing actually. Stop, he's off.
I've got multiple directions on this thing. I can like forwards or... Yeah. And I'm stuck now.
This last one out. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Well done, Hornet.
Hey! Ah, I love a good rumble. A good rumble is where you find where all of the damage happens on your robot because you get hit from every different angle by multiple weapons at once, and it really shows you what can and will break in your robot. And in this case, not a lot broke on Nucleus. There was one shot that snipped the bearing and the bolt out of the weapon motor on one side, on the front side, which I still not really sure exactly how that happened. That is a bit of weird damage to have happened, but I do have spares of these weapons and I can fairly easily get spares of the motor, so all I would need to do there is swap that one out for a brand new weapon and that would be absolutely fine. Also, the armor paneling, the TPU around the outside, held up pretty well. One piece got ripped off, which I think was just the screws got ripped out of it. I was running out of weight in this robot, so each of these front armor panels are only held in with 2 screws, which is not really a lot of thread to be holding in what is effectively your main armor package for the robot, and that's why we lost one. So I think we could have had more screws in there by adjusting some things around the place, saving some weight here and there, and that wouldn't have happened. But even then, with that gone, there's still all of this printed slope in there that needs to be got through before an opponent can get into anything, and even then they're getting into just the motor mount before they hit anything vital, which is the motor. So because of the fact that the pack of all the electronics is basically through the middle here, this robot design actually works very well defensively, which is very cool. And part of the reason why I am considering doing a version 2 of this. I mean, I think for a potential version 2, I would not run 4 drive motors in it anymore, and I would look at upgrading the weapon system and the ESCs. I'd probably end up doing 2 drive motors and belt drive to the front and the back. So still having 4-wheel drive, but not running all of that hardware to get it to work, because that is taking up a lot of weight and space in what is a very, very small robot for what it is trying to do. This version of Nucleus, though, I think it is done at this point. Like I said, I could fairly easily repair it, but I think if I'm going to do anything with this in the future, it will be a version 2. If you'd like to see a version 2, leave a comment about that down below and just let me know so that I can gauge if people are interested in a second version. Also, I would be happy to release the files for this particular design. However, it is very, very heavily based on the Hacksmiths design and the Team Orbitron's design. So if they are okay with me doing that, Hacksmiths, Team Orbitron, if you're out there, if you're watching this video and you're happy with me releasing them, or you'd like to just have them for yourselves, please hit me up, let me know which way we're going to go with that, or if the files aren't going to get released at all. That's fine by me too. I'm not going to release these unless, of course, they say that that's okay. Anyway, that is how Nucleus performed at ARC's July meet. I hope you have enjoyed that one, and I will see you in the next video.